works?
Nope.
Sometimes that. Oh,
You're good.
no.
Can we put her?
Okay. Okay.
Can we put her in the corner? On the top right corner. Just because there's gonna be information on the bottom. Perfect. Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so we're good? Yeah, I'm just gonna stand. Lubna, we're gonna get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Tisha Leonardo Santiago, and I am the Bilingual Community Relations Specialist with the Division on Civil Rights. And with me is Lubna. Lubna, would you like to present yourself? Lubna, you're on.
Assalamualaikum everyone. My name is Lubna Kazi Chowdhury, and I was looking forward to see everyone in person, and unfortunately, COVID planned for me, so I am appearing virtually, and I am a colleague of Tisha as well, and I'm part of the DCR's Strategic and Initiatives Enforcement Unit, and we're part of the attorneys that basically write the law, regulations, and we'll go a little bit more into what we do, but I'm absolutely happy and excited to be here today.
Thank you, Lubna. So as a quick recap, we're going to be introducing you to the New Jersey law against discrimination. We're also going to be introducing you to who is Division on Civil Rights, civil investigations versus criminal investigations, and what does that mean, right? We hear these words every day. Then we're going to go into harassment, discrimination versus bias crimes. Then I'm going to introduce you to the New Jersey Bias Investigation Access System. We're going to do a quick overview of the DCR process. Then I want to introduce you to the Youth Bias Task Force overview and the Youth Ambassador program, which is a great opportunity for your children. And then we're going to do a brief question and answer. Challenge traditions, fight inequality, stand together. That is the slogan of Division on Civil Rights. And you're going to see images throughout the presentation. Those are actually images from our students' competition submissions. In April of 1945, World War II was ending, and black veterans were returning to the US demanding equal treatment, and rightfully so. A gentleman by the name of Dr. James O'Hill, who was a Newark State Assemblyman, introduced the New Jersey Law Against Discrimination Bill. That bill passed unanimously. And on April 16th, 1945, the Law Against Discrimination Bill was enacted, and that created the Division Against Discrimination, which was then renamed Division on Civil Rights. In its original form, the bill only protected employment discrimination on race, color, creed, as well as national origin and ancestry. Since then, back in 1945, it was the first anti-discriminatory law of its kind, and since then it continues to be one of the most broadest and most comprehensive laws in the country. The law declared the mission of the division to prevent and eliminate discrimination in the state of New Jersey, and as of today, the Division on Civil Rights, we also enforce the New Jersey Family Leave Act as well as the Fair Chance and Housing Act. In the 77 years since 1945, the law against discrimination has been amended hundreds of times, literally hundreds of times. Every time making sure that we continue to be the most progressive, most broad, and most comprehensive anti-discriminatory law. Our goal is to bring New Jersey closer to the promise of equal justice, equal opportunity, and equal dignity for all individuals. Now, it's important to note that the Division on Civil Rights is separate from federal government. We are a state agency. That we are committed to serving all New Jersey constituents, regardless of your immigration status, and that DCR offers a free service to all people. And DCR employees will never ask you about your immigration status or citizenship status. All we care is whether or not you have faced discrimination or bias-based harassment and how we could help you. So I keep saying these three words, right? Law against discrimination. What does that mean? So the New Jersey law against discrimination makes it unlawful to subject people to discrimination and harassment based on a protected category. And the law against discrimination prohibits discrimination and bias-based harassment in employment, even if that employer has one employee, housing and real estate except for two-family dwellings, places of public accommodation, so anything that's open to the public, whether it's a school, a government building, prisons and police, medical facilities, so on and so forth, and credit and contracting. Now, protected categories, if you take a second and you look at the 20 or so protected categories before you, you'll realize that we all fit in 3 or more, right? We all have a religion, a race, we all have a national origin, nationality, or ancestry, a sex or gender, as well as marital status. Now, it's important to note that not all the protected categories apply to all the areas that I talked about earlier. So, for example, age is only applicable in in employment. Genetic information genetic information is only for employment, and lawful source of income and familial status is only applicable in housing. Lubna, can you tell us what is prohibited under the law against discrimination?
Thanks, Tisha. So some of the questions that we usually get is what is discriminatory, especially in our communities and especially in immigrant communities. Folks don't understand or cannot detect or deduce what exactly is discriminatory conduct. So anything with regards to harassment, let's say in your employment, you have, you're in a break room, for example, and continuously or multiple times you have folks who use derogatory language, use anti-discrimination terms such as, terrorist, calling you a terrorist or referring you to as a terrorist, those kind of conducts. Policies, for example, if you have an employment that, says no headwear, for example, or, and you're a Muslim woman and wears a hijab, that would be discriminatory too for you. So those are some examples. Discriminatory statements as well, whether it be in print or in person, like I described. Bias-based harassment, including sexual harassment, failure to accommodate, for example, if you were to seek, religious, exemption on a Friday to pray Friday prayers, or if you're a student and you wanted to ask for Eid off, which is an excused absence, and you weren't accommodated for that. Those are some examples. Pay discrimination just because you are Muslim. Retaliation is another form of example, such as, let's say you were going through these situations and you said that you were going to report, or it became known that you were going to report to DCR or to any authority. The person or entity discriminating cannot say that you cannot report, and that is not allowed. So that is also prohibited.
Thank you, Lubna. So under the law against discrimination, it prohibits discrimination and bias-based harassment based on religion or creed. And that protects you whether you belong to a particular religious faith or attend a particular place of worship, like a mosque. If you're associated with a person or a particular religion, for example, your spouse is Muslim, or for me, my family is Muslim, even though I'm not. So even though my family is Muslim, right? My mom got remarried and she married a Muslim man. So every year I take Eid off to be with my family. And I tell everywhere I've worked, I've always told them, I observe Eid with my family, so I will be taking that day off. If you are perceived to be of a particular religious faith, even though you're not actually of that faith, and you're not a member of a particular organized religion, but still hold religious beliefs. However, it's important to note that the law against discrimination does not protect a person's political or social views. Now, it also applies, just like Lubna talked about earlier, it prevents them from discriminating against you when it comes to recruitment, job postings, interviews, hiring decisions, right? So if I identified as Muslim and I was a woman and I wore a hijab and went on a job interview, they could not say, we're not gonna hire her because she wears a hijab, or because she's Muslim. When it comes to promotions, terminations, you cannot be terminated for your religion, as well as your compensation, including your salary and your benefits, all terms, conditions, or privileges of employment, and membership in the union. It's also unlawful for your employer to fail to respond if you've been harassed or if you are subject to any type of bias-based harassment or discrimination in the workplace. So for example, your coworker subjects you to religious slurs, offensive gestures, or hostile comments related to wearing a religious garb. That is prohibited, and your employer is responsible to take immediate action should this happen in the workplace. Lubna, can you tell us about reasonable accommodations for religion in underemployment?
Sure. So the LAD also requires an employer to reasonably accommodate the religious practices or observances of an employee or applicant for employment, unless doing so would create an undue hardship for the employer. So, for example, I know I talked about this before with prayer. It's a simple and a usual request for a Muslim employee. So, for example, I know for myself, if I were to pray, it would be, really 2 prayers sometimes during the winter. I have an office, so for my concentration, I would just shut the door. But for someone who has a cubicle or does not have a designated place where they can make a prayer, they can certainly ask for that accommodation. I know in the past I've asked for a room. If there's other employees who got together and asked for that. Again, the Friday prayer example, if it were, usually it's something that most folks can take a lunch for. And get back, and if there was an extra hour or half an hour that was used up, they can apply it elsewhere. So long as it doesn't create a difficulty for that employer, and if you're going to be taking a lunch anyways, it shouldn't be a problem. Same goes for if you had to take Eid off and the employer can replace you or find coverage for you, for example. So it should not be so burdensome on the employer that they could not continue their regular services, for example. For example, an employer must also permit an employee to take time off for a sincerely held religious belief, such as in our case, Eid, unless the employer can demonstrate an undue hardship on the business. An undue hardship means an accommodation requiring unreasonable expense or difficulty, unreasonable interference with the safe or efficient operation of the workplace, or a violation of a bona fide seniority system, or a violation of any provision of a bona fide collective bargaining agreement. Factors to consider include cost of accommodation, including the cost of loss of productivity or retaining or hiring employees or transferring employees from one facility to another, the number of individuals who will need the particular accommodation. All of these are taken into consideration. And again, it's a case-by-case situation. If you had a company that had a handful of Muslim people asking for time off, it usually would not, cause an undue hardship for the employer. So it is very, very much so based on facts and what the facts are surrounding each case. An accommodation is an undue hardship if it will also result in the inability of the employee to perform the essential functions of the position in which they are employed. Prayer is not, I know that if I were to pray Zohar, Asr, and sometimes Maghrib, it wouldn't take me more than 5 minutes, if that, at each prayer, or 10 tops. And you are allowed breaks as an employee, so you should be able to find that, it take place in your daily work day, and it wouldn't be an undue hardship on the employer. So religious discrimination or harassment is also illegal when renting or buying a home. This is an area that we do want to cover. Just a little note, all of the slides that we're going into will probably and can probably be a whole nother presentation, and we'd love to be invited back. So apologies if we're going into snippets. We would love to come back and explain all of this much more in detail. So when buying a home or renting, landlords and real estate professionals cannot refuse to lease to you or deny you access, or just simply to say we don't rent or sell to Muslims, or financial services who say we don't do mortgages with Muslims, or use you as a client, for example, charge you higher rent, offer you different amenities, or refuse to make you generally required repairs because of your religious affiliation or beliefs. Housing providers must also reasonably accommodate your religious beliefs, unless doing so would be an undue burden on your operation. So, you know, one example I do want to use is that a lot of times it's not just the landlords or the soups, for example, it could be the other tenants. If the other tenants are throwing trash by your front door or harassing you or calling your names, and the landlord refuses to do anything and essentially is facilitating it, that could be discrimination as well. So also another common example is we as Muslims obviously take off our shoes before we enter homes, or just keep them outside our home, a condominium or houses. If there was like a homeowners association rule that was enforced of no personal items in the hallway, it's a broad rule, and if it's offensive to you without any specific reason for that condominium association, that could also be a violation of your rights. So the LAD prohibits discrimination in places of public accommodation also. A lot of folks ask, what does that mean? What's a place of public accommodation? There are some gray areas, but here are some of the clear ones. Schools, colleges, universities, stores and businesses, malls, for example, restaurants, summer camps, hotels and motels, doctors, medical providers, mental health providers, hospitals, substance abuse clinics, anywhere where you're receiving services, medical care, for example, government offices, agencies, including police departments. I bring all these examples up because it's not, something that comes to mind. DMV is a place where a lot of folks, unfortunately face discrimination. It's not something that comes up because you think it's the government, it's not something or someone I can complain against. Schools, absolutely you can, and you have rights in all of these places. Restaurants, a common place. You have folks who might maybe have like a rooftop restaurant, and they, maybe they're one of those Instagram worthy kind of places, and they're not letting or seating you later if you're a hijabi. So, these are things that you want to keep an eye on and be aware of. So you also cannot be refused service, harassed, or be asked to pay more or be subjected to different standards than others seeking the same service because of your religion. So in the case that I used with the restaurant, if you had made a reservation and you see that other being seated before you, or you're seated, but every time you go to this restaurant, they put you all the way in that back booth, for example, away from everybody. If this is something that is, you're being treated differently than others, it can amount to discrimination. Another example, and this is a very common example, and we've seen actual cases for this, is a local municipality, township, for example, that doesn't require permits for religious gatherings, and only requires it for certain groups like Sikhs or Muslims or Hindus when they organize them. It could be like a fair. Let's say it's summer's coming and they have those booths during like a township day. They don't require other folks to get a permit, but they're asking, the local mosque to get a permit. So that is discrimination. Places open to the public must also reasonably accommodate your religious beliefs, unless doing so would be an undue burden on their operation. So for example, a bar or restaurant with a no head covering rule would also need to accommodate a Muslim woman wearing a hijab, a Jewish man wearing a yarmulke, or a Sikh man wearing a turban. And now we're going to go into the differences between civil versus criminal investigations and discrimination, harassment versus bias crimes. So there's a lot of questions about what DCR can do versus, how is it different than your regular criminal investigations, for example, because you'll see that a lot of things can seem similar. So DCR can investigate discrimination and bias-based harassment and can get justice for the victims even when the conduct involved does not constitute a crime. right? So in a case of a bias-based harassment, criminal investigations focus primarily on the individual perpetrator and whether or not they committed a crime. So if you have an individual who is, doing biased crimes against Muslims in a community or in a county, that individual can be prosecuted against by the local prosecutor's office. The GCR investigations focus on whether the employer, housing provider, or places of public accommodation knew about the bias-based harassment and took appropriate steps to address or stop it. And discrimination or harassment versus bias crime. So acts of discrimination or harassment that violate the LAD are civil rights violations and can be addressed through actions for money damages, either at DCR or in Superior Court. And Tisha will go through the NJ bias steps also, so that will be clearer a little bit later in the slides. And then bias crimes are criminal offenses that are committed against a person, private property, or public property because of race, color, religion, gender, disability, sexual orientation, gendered identity or expression, national origin, or ethnicity. The ones that really apply to this group, for example, are national origin or ethnicity, being an Arab, being an Indian, being a Bangladeshi, for example, and as well as religion. The crime is committed with the purpose to intimidate a member of a protected class, which is the ones I just went over, for example, in this case being Muslim, or belonging to a certain ethnicity, or knowing that the conduct would intimidate a member of a protected class.
So in November of 2020, the Division on Civil Rights, we launched something called the New Jersey Bias Investigation Access System. Now, this is an online portal. Prior to the portal, you'd have to take a day off, find one of our 4 offices, make your way to the office, or to fill out the application, the intake form, speak to an intake investigator. They would draft a complaint, and you'd spend like half your day there, right? Or you would mail in your intake form and then wait for somebody to call back, or you to call. It was like a whole process. Now, since November 2020, we introduced NJ bias. Now, it's important to know with NJ bias, anyone can fill it out, right? You could do it within 15 to 30 minutes, depending on what you are filing a complaint about. And it's important to note that you have 180 days from the last alleged violation to file a complaint on NJ bias. Now, so what happens if you're not computer literate or you don't have access to a computer or internet? Then you can call us at 1-833-NJ-DCR for you. Yes, we try to be a little jingly so you guys remember us. And then you would speak to one of our DCR receptionists, and they will go ahead and complete your intake in the system. Now, when you log on, you're going to go to bias.njcivilrights.gov. You're going to see this screen pop up for you, right? Then you're going to click on File a Complaint. Once that screen pops up, you're going to see 6 icons. The first 5 are for Division on Civil Rights. The 6th one is for Division of Criminal Justice. And it's important to note that you would just select your complaint, right? So that's why we told you could file for employment, place of public accommodation, housing, New Jersey family leave, so on and so forth. Then you would just create your portal, your email address, your contact information, get a email that you just verify that you've created the account, and then go ahead and do your intake form. Now, the cool thing is we also created resource handbooks, right? So it literally gives you step-by-step on how you can complete it, and it's in English and in Spanish, the portal. So what if someone doesn't speak English? What if somebody doesn't speak Spanish? Great question. Then you would just call us, or you could call us, or you could have someone call on your behalf, and then we would set up an appointment with an interpreter. So then you're able to communicate with us, so we're able to collect your information. The system also allows you to have someone file on your behalf. So for example, we have CARE NJ with us here today. So CARE NJ would be able to file on an individual's behalf since they are a non-attorney advocate. I'm also the NJ Bias Community Liaison, so I'm leaving my business cards, so should you ever have to file a complaint with us, and you have issues, you can call me and I will walk you through the system. I will troubleshoot it with you. I will give you more information about Division on Civil Rights and everything that we're covering today. Lubna, can you tell us a little bit more about the DCR intake and investigation process, please?
So as part of the intake form, the constituent will be able to schedule an intake interview with the DCR investigator, and that investigator will know, for example, like what questions to ask, the factual questions. So just, obviously be patient with them. They have to be able to provide certain answers to the legal specialist as to whether, there's a complaint that they can prepare, for example. So during the interview, the investigator will ask questions. Because DCR has jurisdiction over the complaint, meaning whether the complaint alleges a violation, are there enough facts to find that the LAD has occurred within the past 180 days, for example. Those are some of the things that, they're going to prod and pick at you and ask you for. So if so, DCR will prepare the verified complaint. If there is sufficient information from you, the form will be prepared for your signature. Once the constituent signs the verified complaint, they're known as the complainant from here on. And then DCR will serve the verified complaint on the respondent. And this will be the individual or the entity who has caused the discriminatory acts. And respondent has a chance to respond with its version of the events. So DCR conducts investigations, which may include interviews with the complainant, respondent, and witnesses, review of relevant documents, emails, photos, video recordings, whatever that there may be. At the end of the investigation, if the parties have not reached a mutually agreeable resolution of the complaint, then DCR will determine whether or not there is probable cause to believe a violation of the LAD and if it's occurred. If DCR does believe it occurred, it will prosecute the violation in the court of the Office of the Administrative Law. And at the conclusion of the case, DCR can actually order money to the victim and equitable relief.
Thank you, Lubna. So now we're going to transition, and I want to talk to you a little bit about the Youth Bias Interagency Task Force. The interagency came together in 2019. And their goal was to figure out why was there such an uptick in youth bias, meaning that there was a lot of incidents amongst the youth that shouldn't be occurring. These 8 state agencies, including Division on Civil Rights, came together and we conducted a series of listening sessions, research. We wanted to hear from the community members about what was going on to help us figure out how to combat bias amongst our youth. In October of 2020, we released a 103-page report. Don't worry, we also provided a 2-page summary because we realized not everyone's going to read the 103 pages. And in that report, we laid out 27 groundbreaking recommendations in the areas of education, community engagement, and enforcement. And in these 27 recommendations, it created a crisis response team, which is what the unit that I sit in. Our community relations unit also serves as a crisis response, which means if a civil rights incident were to occur in the state of New Jersey, my unit, which includes myself, another community relations specialist, and a lead community mediator, would go out to the affected community. And our goal is to empower the community, educate the community, and help the community move past what has occurred by giving them the resources that they need. So whether that is having community dialogues, whether that is, showing up when there's a protest or rally to ensure that it doesn't escalate to violence, coordinating with everyone involved to open lines of communication. Our goal is that once we have left a community, we have left you empowered, educated, and resourceful. Recommendation 25 was we launched a statewide Stand Up to Hate campaign. And we received over 176 submissions from students between the ages of 10 to 25. So you saw the different images throughout the presentation today. The one in the protected categories that says we are all human, that was drawn by a 10-year-old. We had our winners announced in April of 2021, and they became the first cohort of our Youth Ambassador program. And the reason we created the Youth Ambassador Program was because when I was talking to the winners, I would ask them, what drew you to the competition? What do you know about Division on Civil Rights? What do you know about your civil rights? And they all had the same answer. My teacher told me about the competition, and I filled it out. I don't really know about civil rights. I don't really know about Division on Civil Rights. So the division, we saw that as an opportunity to educate the youth. Why? Because 10, 20, 30 years, they are going to be our community organizers. They are going to be our attorneys, our doctors, our legal specialists. They are going to be our teachers. So it's important for the youth to know, what are their civil rights in the state of New Jersey? A lot of times in immigrant communities, myself being a second generation Jersey native, first generation college graduate, I had a grandmother at home that didn't speak English, right? So if my mom wasn't around, I had to translate. And that's very common in immigrant households, where you, as a kid, you are the translator, the legal document reviewer. Apparently you have all the degrees without being over 18. So we saw this as an opportunity to teach kids not just about civil rights, but also about basic things, right? How to create a resume, how to organize a program or put a presentation like today's, and find out what was their interest and help mold those interests and put them in the position that once they enter college, they'll have things on their resume that they could use for internship opportunities. Division on Civil Rights, we also offer internships for college students. So this is a great way for students to start making those relationships with state agencies, so by the time it's time to look at internships, they've made those connections. So just a brief cap. Eligibility is 10 to 25. Yes, I know that is a big age gap, but we do it on purpose. Why? Because we have undergraduate students, we have graduate students. We have students that may be first generation college graduates. So we want to start developing a kind of mentee-mentor mentorship through the various years of our cohorts. We don't ask for a minimum grade point average or any of those qualifications, because we realize that there may be students that are interested in civil rights but aren't great students, right? So it's a way to connect them with other students throughout the state, and hey, they may get a tutor out of it. We only ask for a 1-year commitment at a time, and that runs September through June. And like I said, the purpose is to help them develop an understanding about what is civil rights and social justice, to learn how to be involved in their community. I remember my brothers came to this mosque when we were growing up, and they were always at all the different type of events. So it's great to have kids that are going to their mosque or their churches or their synagogues, and also learning these skill sets that they could bring in to their houses of worship, right? To learn how to be a leader, you have to start at some point. So we help teach them that. They also get opportunities to participate on DCR programs and projects. So for example, in June of 2021, we had the white supremacy listening sessions. And our youth ambassadors were actually able to give their own testimonies around their experiences with white supremacy. We also had them participate as panelists or contributors in the ideas of the programs that we put forth. They can also give us ideas of the type of programming we should do. They attend a monthly meeting with myself, and these meetings and workshops are tailored to their interests. So for example, in January, we did social media and activism. Kids love to be on social media. So we're gonna teach you how to be on social media in a positive way. In February, we did peer-to-peer mentoring, mediation, a concept of introducing them to the concept of what mediation is at a younger level, a younger age. Last month, we actually had our spring summer intern, sit with them and talk about what it's like being an intern with our division, how they became an intern, what they had to do at high school and college to be able to get this internship opportunity. And I think that was the most those kids have ever spoken, because they talked about Model UN, they talked about debate club, they talked about music. They were really interested in hearing from someone much younger than, much closer to their age, about these opportunities. And then our ultimate outcome is, like I said in the beginning, there's 3 of us in my unit. We cover all of New Jersey. I cover all of the northern counties. My colleague carries the middle, and my colleague in the south covers all the southern counties. So we average 7 counties per community relations specialist, we can't be everywhere. So we really lean in on our DCR youth ambassadors to let us know, like, hey, there's something going on in my community. Or, hey, my mom experienced discrimination in the workplace. Or, hey, my mom was telling me that my aunt from down south is going through something. It's a way for us to connect and serve as a resource regardless of the age. And like I said, it's to help them develop skills and experiences that they can add to their portfolio and resume. Lubna, do you want to tell us about how individuals can engage with DCR?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's imperative that we do. So contact the Community Relations Unit, which is crew, with questions, suggestions, or requests for participation in an event or initiative via email. And I think we're, not only are they on the screen, but we might, you can reach out to us or we'll have a packet for you. Sign up for updates, visit our website, njcivilrights.gov, to sign up for email updates about our current and upcoming events. And then obviously follow us up on Facebook and Twitter. And just one plug there is, I know that, for example, organizations such as CARE, and if you have like local organizations, reach out to them as well, because they are a connection to us. They're boots on the ground. Don't just sit there if you saw something. I know it's something that is very common in our communities, especially the immigrant communities, to just kind of let it go. But with the bias incident report, for example, or events that, regulations that we do, or any acts that, any actions that we take, we cannot take them if we do not know that they're happening. So it's really imperative that you speak up and, communicate with us. Or if there's a complaint that you have to file or someone has to file, encourage them to file that on NHIEC.
Thank you, Lubna. And that's a great segue. You mentioned upstanders or bystanders, right? So Division on Civil Rights, we also have an education and training unit. They actually deliver 90 minutes to 3-hour trainings on various topics, from understanding implicit bias to how to address microaggressions, so on and so forth. So I welcome you all to register for upcoming trainings. They offer them multiple times a month. And just to let you know, here's the plug, it is free. You don't have to pay, you just have to register and show up and keep your camera on and learn a little bit more about us and how to address these different type of things, so you're able to go back into your community and let other people know, like, hey, you need to take this training, or hey, you need to call Tisha and Luna to come back and do another presentation. Just another plug. So now we're going to transition to our favorite part of the whole presentation. But first, we need to give you a disclosure. Please be advised that New Jersey Division on Civil Rights and its employees, including myself and Luna, do not give legal counsel or legal advice. Today's presentation is for information purposes only. Do we have any questions? Yes.
Thank you for the presentation. So in my mind, if I ever experienced anything discriminatory, thankfully I haven't really, or maybe I haven't had to notice, I would have thought to go to care first, because of like that's their focus, where you guys are more inclusive of other issues. In a situation like that, would you go to both? I guess you could try to both.
That is a great question. I was playing with the mic, sorry. So the question is, if someone was to experience discrimination or bias-based harassment, kind of rephrasing here, would they go to CARE or Division on Civil Rights, or would they go to both of us? Lubna, would you like to answer, or would you like me to answer?
Yeah, absolutely. I can take a stab. And the answer is, tell us both. I mean, first of all, I know with CARE, I've interned with them when I was in high school. They've been around for literally ever. They advocate, and I don't want to speak on behalf of Saladin, but they advocate for Muslim issues, but we also do. So as part of my unit, for example, each one of the attorneys have a specific topic or topics. One of my topics is religious discrimination, immigrant communities, and the other is health, justice, or equity. The folks each of the attorneys that work on these specific areas have personal experience, and not only lived in experience, but professional experience. So as an attorney who's done work in the area as well as had personal experience, it's my imperative, it's on me to ensure that these complaints are given attention. The other part I want to go over is that DCR is charged with, not only the LAD, but the FMLA, the FCHA. All of these laws give rights. We're able to even create law. We're able to change law. I'm working on ensuring that Muslims and immigrant communities are represented in these areas. If there's something that's discriminatory towards Muslims or immigrant communities, I'm bringing that up. The fact sheets, things that are public facing, should be inclusive of the Muslim community, right? So we have the power. We're a government agency, so we can bring, obviously like to prosecution. We can have an investigation through our law division. We have the power to do that. Now, CARE works, is a great organization that brains can be had in the past brought complaints to us and said, this is what's going on. What are you guys going to do about it? Because we can obviously pay attention to it. So, my short answer is you're not restricted to go to both. NG Bias is a complaint portal that you would do. It's a government, you go through it, like Tisha talked about. And CARE is to bring awareness. And again, I'm not speaking on behalf of Salah. I'm sure Saladin would also talk about that.
Thank you, Lubna. And just to follow up, I always welcome multiple partnerships, meaning that if you could go to Karen J and say, hey, this is going on. And he could say, you know what, let me pick up the phone and call DCR. And they could let us know whether or not this is something that falls within their wheelhouse. Because like I said, we cover employment, housing, places of public accommodation, and credit and contracting. So if it falls outside of those 4 areas in the state of New Jersey, then that was something that CARE could take and run with. And they could always run it by us and say, hey, we just want to make sure that this doesn't fall within DCR's scope. So the more the merrier. Do we have any other questions? Any questions from our audience back there? One question? No? Okay. So this is my favorite part when we don't have questions. I ask you questions. What are 3 things you've taken from today's presentation? If y'all don't raise your hands, I start picking. Sister in the back with the teal shirt sitting. Yes. What is one thing you took away from today's presentation? You can ask for a lifeline. Okay, and Lubna, I'm not sure if you heard any of that? No, okay. So our sister in the teal in the back sitting down said that she got a lot of great information. One was around Friday prayers and being able to take that time to go and pray even if you're working. Gentlemen? Okay, let's start with our question first. Okay, so the question is, could you take a religious stance if your place of employer has a no facial hair policy? Luna, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, I heard that question. Thank you. So remember we talked about, it shouldn't have some kind of an undue burden on the employer. So if they have a clean shape policy and you are working in, I don't know, food service, and if the employer couldn't give you some kind of like a mask or something to cover your beard, then, and it would pose an issue for their customers, for example, that's something that, you want to think about. But do you want to give me more facts? What is the setting, for example?
lot of. Oh, the context would be that we often have to wear respirators in our job, and rightfully so. They would say like you may not be able to fit the respirator on your face, and so it could just get in the way when it comes to dealing with toxic chemicals like mercury or just random things. Like, fun fact, we deal with cyanide, so that's don't.
You have to shave your face.
That is a personal decision. Like we said, we don't give legal advice or legal counsel. Personal decision. But if you suspect that you are being subjected to any type of discrimination, you could always fill out an intake and speak to someone. Worst case they'll say is, no, I'm sorry, you don't have a case with our office. And then you would just get a list of referrals.
Okay.
Of additional agencies or NGOs that you could contact.
Okay.
We don't have that on the list though, but I might make the suggestion. And what was your takeaway?
Well, I guess it was going to be trying to fight for your legal rights. Also, just trying to, like, not being afraid to, I think she mentioned the Friday prayer, but also not being afraid to just take some time to pray as long as it's not getting in the way of work. Which I guess also raises another question, like if you're the only Muslim in your company, like, can you still ask, like, to make it like a is it asking too much to try to establish a prayer room, or like something like this time of the day is for like prayer, even though I'm the only Muslim here? So I wondered if that's worthwhile, or to set a precedent for if any other Muslims join the company.
That is a great question. I'll take a stab at it and then I'll hand it over to Lubna. Remember how we talked about undue hardship? So you could always present it to your employer, and if it doesn't cause undue hardship for them, like having to build out a whole new room, something along those lines, it's a conversation worth having. They could come back and say, no, we don't have the space, we literally don't have a room, and you can see for yourself that they don't have a room. It's always about opening lines of communication and see if, is this successful? Can they do this? But I always welcome those type of workplace accommodations, just because it makes it feel a little bit more inclusive, and I'm just speaking from the I. Lubna, do you want to tag in?
Yeah, I've actually lived through that personal experience, and it was also a government agency, and it was 2 of us, and I had asked. We were given like a utility room that was housed that used to house papers, like those big mason boxes. And, there were times where we didn't have any room to pray, so we would have a chair that we could sit on and pray. Or, there's been instances where there was no room. The employer said, I literally do not have a room. And they don't have to make a room, right? Like, so again, going back to the undue hardship, they don't have to section off their office to make another room. But again, they can't tell you can't pray. You can go to your car and pray. You can pray in your cubicle. So open up those lines of communication, even if it's just one person. And I've been there. I've worked with, folks who didn't know what Islam is. So just until you ask, you wouldn't know.
Okay, Jazakallah khair. That helps a lot. Like praying in your car, I guess it's doing what you can, essentially. But
All right,
yeah.
and like I said,
Yeah, and I'm gonna say that honestly, that comes from even back in college when we had honestly, it was Islamic Relief or it might have been another organization that gave us the idea. You can actually ask for a room, you can ask for a cubicle. So it's just something that's carried throughout. So until you ask, you won't know.
yes. Do we have any other questions?
I had 2 questions. This one may be dumb, but everything
There
is
are no dumb questions. Just
all-
questions not asked.
It sounds very obvious, but all these incidents have to happen within the state's borders, right?
Correct. That is a great question.
Okay.
So the law against discrimination is only limited within this New Jersey. So if here's the catch, right? If your employer is headquartered in California, right? but you work in New Jersey, like you're a remote worker in New Jersey, the LAD applies to you because you are conducting your work within.
New Jersey.
Yes.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yes.
So,
And what is your second question?
the second one was, this hasn't happened yet, but if it does happen, if my employer requires me to show my gender pronouns in my email or in my profile, could I make a case to not have to do that?
That is a good question. Lubna?
So from a religious perspective, the reasoning would be normalizing non-binary genders. So if I have a religious reason against it, and not that I'm hurting anyone by putting my gender pronouns, but I don't believe in normalizing it. So I wouldn't want to personally, put he, she, etc.
Okay. Lubna?
So we haven't dealt with that here yet, but I have been hearing things about that just personally. As far as like your choice to normalize it is, versus you asking to pray or wear hijab or wear your beard, it's not considered on the same platform yet. So we haven't dealt with it. We don't know what the case law would be if it were to come forward. So I hate saying I don't have an answer, but I really don't have an answer. I have heard it. I've heard folks say that. It's just hasn't been addressed yet by our courts.
It's okay, and I've been reading into it. It hasn't happened anywhere yet, not that I'm aware of. Big companies have been promoting it and really encouraging their employees to do it in an effort to, be more inclusive for people, right, on the gender spectrum. But at the same time, if it were to reach the point where I'm required to do it, you're basically asking me to participate in something I don't want to. And it's a tricky area, it's like, I'm not trying to be uninclusive. I'm not trying to harm anyone or not want to respect other people's opinions, but sort of like, just don't force it on me. I don't want to have to label all my profiles with it. You see it now everywhere on LinkedIn, and in my office personally, like a lot of people have it in their signatures. Like it's like name, title, gender pronouns, and then phone number and everything. Like it's part of your identity, basically. That's very visible. So I was just curious, if it were to happen, what would I do?
So I hear you. I completely hear you. So a lot of the times we do it, and specifically, like, for example, I have a coworker who goes by their long name is like, some people can't pronounce it, so they use a shortened name. But a lot of people will think it's masculine. So including the pronouns lets people know off the bat, like, hey, please don't call me Mr. in the emails. I identify as she, her. But I understand where you're coming from, was kind of like the opposite side of the coin, where you don't want your pronouns added so people are able to identify you correctly. You just prefer not to engage in it for religious beliefs. And that is a great question, and I think we could take that back and kind of discuss it more internally, because if you're bringing it up and Lubna's been hearing it as well, it's probably at some point going to make it to our front door. Do we have any other questions? Yes.
Funny enough, you had a question.
So I have two questions. My first question is that, like, sometimes at school, like if somebody, for example, he lost something, but then he always refers to me and says, "Did you steal it?" He said, "I'm telling on you," and I'm like, I feel like they wanna be mean to me just because of my religion, but they don't want to even say it, so they don't get in trouble.
That is a great question. I have two questions before I answer your question. Where's your parent?
There.
Okay, because I need to have your parent near you so I can talk to you directly. So do I have permission to engage your child? Okay, perfect. We've got permission to engage. Lubna, do you want to take a stab at it?
Yeah, I think it's great, first of all, that you're even acknowledging this, that this isn't, something's not right. Is it something based in religious or immigrant or national origin discrimination? I'm not sure, because I don't know what race that person is, or if they've called you certain names, like derogatory names, like bad names, and that you being Muslim or anything like that. Either way, I do think that you should address it with your parents. Your parents should address it with the school, because it should stop. It could be bullying beyond whether that's religion or not. But one other thing that I do want to remind you is that a lot of, what we've seen in 2020, for example, from our bias incident report, a lot of the bias incidents that have happened, they've happened by minors. So, we think it's not happening in schools or colleges. It is. Other than that, I think that, like the steps that I gave you, speak to your parents first, obviously. I'm sure they know because we're talking about it now. I'm glad that you're aware. Keep your eyes and ears open all the time, and never feel like you cannot speak up. Even if you're not sure about it, just first talk to your parents, and then your parents can talk to the authorities.
And what was your second question?
My second question was that, like for the Friday prayer, it's basically around 1 o'clock, but the school, even for pickup, they get us out like 4 o'clock.
So I want to make sure I understand your question. So you want to go to the 1 o'clock prayer, but you can't because you're in school, right? And then you usually come at 4 o'clock after you get let out and do the 4 o'clock prayer instead. So your question is, do you want to pray at school? Or do you want to be able for your parents to pick you up and bring you to the mosque to pray and then take you back?
To pick me up and then bring me back.
That's a really good question. Lubna?
Yeah, I know family members who do that. My kids are younger, but I know family members and friends who do that. They pick up their kids on Friday, pick them up, or if it's like elementary school, they have like the remainder of the day off. And it would depend on each township, I'm assuming, or district. But you can request that and see where it goes. And I haven't seen any issues with it. So I know for high schools, a lot of children do leave, come back, same for middle school.
And we could talk more with your mom when we're done, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Do you have any more questions?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, so we have any more questions?
Here's a question again.
Comments. You want me to talk now? Okay. They're going to have me
Yes.
take it through the
Okay, so that concludes our presentation and Q&A. We want to say thank you again for having us. We greatly appreciate it. Our contact information online, njcivilrights.gov. FYI, we have the fact sheet packet that we handed out today. If you haven't gotten one, please let me know. I'll bring it to you. It's available. Our fact sheets are available in 11 different languages. I always encourage people to go online and look at our fact sheets. If you see that we're missing a language that may be very prominent in your community, please let us know so we can see what accommodations we can make. If you have questions or want to file a complaint and don't have access to a computer, 1-833 DCR for you, 711 relay. Email us at communityrelations@njcivilrights. Please, pretty please, follow us on Facebook and Twitter to stay up to date with our upcoming programs. And our hashtag CivilRightsNJ, no hate in this great state, as well as stop the hate. Thank you.
Hold on, just one second.
Lubna, I'm gonna disconnect.
We wanted to thank you, Sister Lubna, and you, Sister Tisha, for coming and participating in our community and educating us. And so now we'll end with Kir, inshallah.
Thank you both, Sister Tisha and Lubna, for coming to our community here at NHIEC. And thank you, NHIEC, for hosting this very important conversation, for making time and for having the opportunity to speak to us, to host the opportunity to speak about this conversation. I'll keep it very brief because most people know what CARE is, alhamdulillah. But we do very similar work to the DCR. And alhamdulillah, we are happy to serve the New Jersey community. So CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, is America's largest and oldest Muslim civil rights and advocacy group. Our work breaks up into three categories: civil rights, which is very much what was talked about today, LAD, and general legal services for those that face harassment or discrimination, on the basis of their race or religion. And then the other two components of our work is the advocacy work and the educational programming. Now, not everything can be solved in the courts, right, or through litigation. So we try to do advocacy work to get these issues resolved, and kind of diplomacy or behind-the-scenes work, whether it's with employers, businesses, politicians, community leaders, any group at all. Inshallah, we work with them to resolve issues so that it doesn't go to the court, right, or a lawsuit. We try to solve the situation before it gets that very lengthy and expensive process. And then the other last component of our work is the educational programming. So we do educational workshops for the community, very much like this, and also civic engagement and other areas of interest. And we also educate non-Muslims about Islam, about our community, about our practices, about how they can make the workplace more inclusive and cognizant of their Muslim employees. What practices and what situations can they adopt to make the workplace more welcoming? For example, there are other things that we do as well. I want to give a few examples to some of the cases that we deal with, just to give you an idea of what it looks like. So, for example, we have one very big case right now that we're dealing with, where a teacher in a public school here in New Jersey was supporting the Palestinian cause and the BDS movement. And her employer rather, was sent nearly 100 emails about how this woman, because she supports Palestine on social media, they called her anti-Semitic, and in fact, they called her a Jew hater. And they said, you have to fire this woman from your school because she's anti-Semitic. So this obviously is unconstitutional, right? You have the freedom of speech, you have this right to be critical of Israel. You should not lose your job because you are speaking about the oppressed people of Palestine. So we worked with this sister, and we were able to save her job, both at her public high school, and now we're working on her job at MSU, Montclair State University. She's an adjunct professor there, so we're trying to save her job there as well, because the Zionists were emailing both the university and the public school. So this is an example of one case that we work on. Another case, for example, Muslim inmates that are in prisons or jails across the state, when they ask for halal food accommodations. There's a big case right now that we're dealing with in Trenton. There are Jewish inmates that get kosher accommodation, the food. They also serve vegetarian and vegan. But when the Muslim inmates asked for the accommodation for halal food, they actually were told no. They said, no, you can't, which is ridiculous, right? Because they already have accommodations for everyone else. But when the Muslims asked, there was a flat no. So this is a case we're working on. Bullying, right, in the schools. You mentioned about these situations. These are also issues that we work on. We have one case where, for example, this is recent, this year, a teacher was teaching to all of the students how the terrorists, she pointed to a map, right, on in the classroom, and she was teaching about the Middle East. And she said, Afghanistan and Pakistan, this is where all the terrorists are coming from. They're coming to America. But don't worry, she said, because Joe Biden's going to protect us. Right? This is what she's saying. Imagine you were a Muslim student in this class, or from Pakistan or Afghanistan. How would that make you feel, right? And this only makes bullying against Muslim students even worse, right? So we're dealing with this case. Another example, and I'll end with this, inshallah. There was Muslim students in a high school who wanted to start an MSA, a Muslim Student Association. Now, you spoke about Jummah, right? Many public schools even pray Jummah in the public school. They do this. It's actually really great. They have MSAs, they have prayer spaces, they have Jummah. Some high schools in New Jersey, they do this. There is one high school in central New Jersey. When the Muslim students asked to start an MSA, the principal said, no, you can have what he called a moon and star club, but you cannot talk about the Quran, he said, in this moon and star club. It makes no sense, right? Because, again, there are many examples of MSAs throughout the public schools already. But this principal, he doesn't know the law, he doesn't know, why he can be accommodating his Muslim students. So we're working on this case. These are just, some examples of some of the work that we do, alhamdulillah. And of course, we do always work very closely with DCR. Whenever there's a case that we can't handle, we don't have the capacity to do, or maybe it's out of our scope, or we don't have the know-how, or the expertise, we will always send our community members to DCR because we trust them, we know them, they've been here for longer, well, I don't know how longer than CARE. Oh, okay, yeah, so mashallah, I mean, they are experts in their fields, right? They are attorneys, they are advocates, they work under the AG's office, so we always are referring our community members to them if, for whatever reason, we can't help that community member. I encourage everyone to look up both the DCR and CARE online, follow us on social media, reach out to our offices if you're interested in more educational programming, if you want to learn more about these issues or about how we can help you or your community. If you have a complaint, feel free to reach us on social media or calling our office or contacting us here today, stopping us and asking us questions. Alhamdulillah, thank you all for having me. I'll end with that, inshallah. Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum.
So, assalamu alaikum. We know that it's been a long day for mostly everyone, and we thank you all for your participation, inshallah. And for those who are with us online, we thank you as well. And we want, this is actually, I think this is the first time this came into the masjid, right? So we're looking to see for the whole community to benefit from this partnership actually between DCR and CARE and the Muslim community. So we thank you once again. Assalamu alaikum.
جزاك الله خيركم